The Raft by S.A. Bodeen. Chapter 7. My limbs froze and my heart pounded in my ears as I watched Max struggle to get back to the cockpit. The flotation device was still in my lap, but I didn't even try to put it on. I couldn't make myself look at it. None of this was real, none of it. Everything was fuzzy, dull. None of it could possibly be real. The G1 bounced all over, and then we went into a dive so steep my belly strained against the seatbelt, and then I couldn't do anything but hold my hands over my face and scream into them. I didn't see Max coming until he was right there. With one hand, he held onto the seat across the aisle. With the other, he grabbed my shoulder and shook, hard, until I stopped screaming. His face was inches from mine, and his eyes narrowed. "Listen to me. If you want to get out of here, you have to listen." I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't do anything but listen. His breath smelled of coffee as he continued to yell at me face to face. The G1 should stay on the surface for about 5 minutes. If we stand any chance at all, we've got to get the raft out the window exit, then inflate it. You can't inflate it before it goes out the window. Understand? He was so close, it seemed like I absorbed his words through my face, not my ears. I couldn't do anything but look at him. Leaning back a little, he grimaced and then yelled, "Do you understand?" A few flecks of spit landed on my face. I just sat there. He slapped me. Shocked out of my paralysis, I set a hand on my cheek and nodded like a maniac. 5 more minutes and we're down. Get your life vest on. Get ready to exit. We've got to be fast or... He hesitated and then finished his sentence. "Or we'll go down with the plane. Understand?" Again, I nodded, even though I only wanted to scream. Max stumbled back to the cockpit. I wanted so badly to hear what was worse than this. I needed to know what was worse. There had to be something worse. Didn't there? My hands shook so bad that I just sat there, cradling the one thing that might save my life, the one thing that would do absolutely no good if I didn't get it on in time. Things suddenly got quieter. Then there were new sounds. Shudders and squeaks and an anguished mechanical groan like something out of a horror movie. Max barreled down the aisle toward me and with a loud grunt ripped the exit window open. The wind and rain burst in, and it would have nearly blown me away if I hadn't been strapped in. But in one motion, Max clicked open my seatbelt, gripped me under the armpits, and picked me up like a small child, wobbling as the plane jostled us. He stepped to the opening. The wind whistled and rain pelted my face. Putting up my hands to protect myself, I shouted, "My life vest!" He just tightened his grip on me and screamed back, "Hold your breath and kick for the surface. The raft will be there." And then he threw me out the window. Chapter 8. The life vest was ripped from my arms as I zoomed through the air. The blast of wind and rain took my breath away so that the scream coming up from my gut stopped dead. The falling lasted forever, my arms windmilling in the void. I wanted to stop moving, stop the noise, stop the wet, stop the cold, stop the blowing, stop everything, stop, please. But if I stopped, it meant I was dead. Dying wasn't what I wanted. Breathing was. I just wanted to breathe and live. Chapter 9. My feet hurt when they hit the cold water, and I sank, feeling like I would never stop. Salt water poured in my open mouth as I screamed at the darkness swallowing me. I could see only black, could feel only the shock of cold and wet as I fell further into the crushing nothingness. Am I dying? Because if this was it, my last moments on Earth, I just wanted it to be over. God, please kill me already. This is more than I can take. Chapter 10. And I floated down, down, down. It was over. I was over. Dying was so much easier than I ever thought. Chapter 11. It turned out dying was too easy. Something in me wouldn't accept the easy way out. My arms flailed and my legs kicked, and after a moment stopped my descent. My legs kicked more and helped me move slowly toward the surface. My eyes were open, and through the blur, above me, reddish light glowed. As I reached up with my arms, my air went, my panic grew, and I struggled to hang on. I struggled not to lose my mind. I struggled as if my life depended on it, because I was certain that it did. God, please let me reach the light. I want to live. Fighting with every kick, every ounce of reserve I had left, the light got brighter, closer, and I reached up, planning to burst out into the air, but I couldn't. I was at the surface, I knew I was, but my hands touched a barrier. Something was there, soft and yielding, but I couldn't push through. The red was all around it. I was so close, but something kept me from air, from life, from not dying. In an airless, thoughtless frenzy, my legs kept kicking as my hands pounded, pushed, and slapped. My head whipped from side to side as I screamed, a silent no, no, no. Chapter 12. Suddenly my hair jerked and my scalp burned, and then I was moving up, up, up into the wind and the rain and the rushing and terrible howling. No, you're hurting me. It was all that I wanted to shout at the guy who attacked me in Honolulu. But there in the water, I thrashed with my arms and legs, fought with everything I had as I choked, gasping for air. The hands were too strong, and they pulled me out of the water by my hair until I fell backward onto something soft and wet. I opened my eyes. There was only red, and Max, on his knees, panting, holding a lit flare, the red light I'd seen where I was below. His other hand clutched hanks of hair, my hair. Lying on my back, spewing up seawater, I was drenched and cold and shaking and exhausted. I started to let fresh air into my lungs, but it hurt. It hurt so bad I didn't want to breathe for a moment. I rolled onto my side, spitting and choking. I yelled at Max with as much strength as I had. "You threw me! Out!" My words were weak, closer to a gasp than actual speech. How could you do that? His back was to me. Had he even heard my voice? I sat up, still hacking into the deluge of rain and wind. I pressed my hands against my chest, trying to hold back the pain of breathing. I couldn't believe how bad it hurt, how bad drowning, almost drowning, hurt. Max turned left to where, about 100 yards away, blue lights winked. The lights on the wing, the plane. "Larry!" Max screamed. "Larry!" I had to cover my ears so I wouldn't scream myself. I closed my eyes and squeezed my hands tighter over my ears and was alone with the pounding of my heart. Alone with the stinging of my scalp. Alone with the pain in my chest. Alone with the rain on my face. Alone with my freezing, wet clothes, clammy, dead weight against my skin. My breathing slowed, alone with the truth. I had almost died. Panic surged through my gut and I opened my eyes and uncovered my ears, welcoming the rush of noise and chaos, grateful for their distraction from the truth. In the wind, in the rain, in the red-tinged night, the raft thrashed us up and down with no mercy. The blue lights slipped lower and lower until they winked out. The G1 was gone. Chapter 13. Again and again, Max shouted for Larry, screaming until his voice grew hoarse. Then he stopped and hunched over, hugging his knees, one hand still clutching the flare. The other hand held one side of his head. Tears now mixed with the rain on my face, and sobs blended with my coughs. In a moment, my fear was going to overwhelm me, so I tried to cling to my fury. "You threw me out of the plane!" Still not looking at me, he said, just loud enough so I could hear, "Would you rather still be on it?" And then I was quiet. He wasn't waiting for an answer, because any answer would have been stupid. Because by throwing me out of the plane, he'd saved my life. And because I was suddenly certain he would rather be sitting in the raft with Larry instead of me. What seemed like seconds later, but must have been several minutes, the flare went out with a little splurge of sparks. Chapter 14. Beneath the waves and the wind, the raft bounced about, giving us a ride nearly as harrowing as the one we just endured. Shivering from both fear and the temperature, I huddled by myself, one hand clutching the slippery side of the raft, my other arm wrapped around my knees, face buried. I couldn't bring myself to raise it up, look around. I didn't want to know, for sure, that there was nothing to see because it was too dark. I didn't want to know, for sure, that I was stuck out there in the nothing. Was Max still there in the raft with me? He had to be. I told myself that, because I would have gone insane being there alone. Max? No answer. Maybe he was upset, trying to deal with what just happened. Or maybe he hated me, not caring whether I was scared. And why should he? If I hadn't been there, if he hadn't had to take care of me, maybe he could have helped Larry. Maybe he could have gotten Larry out, and Larry would be sitting in the raft instead of me. I lifted my head into pelting rain that stung my face, and I held up a hand in front of my face. Nothing. A surge toppled me onto my side, and I quickly sat back up. I had to know that Max was there with me, but I couldn't bring myself to yell his name. What if he didn't answer? I inched along the side, feeling the raft as I struggled to hold on as it tossed about. I rounded one corner, thinking he must be within reach. I held out my hand. I would not survive this night if I thought I was alone. My fingertips brushed his arm, found his wet hand, chilled. Dripping fingers closed over mine. I gasped, mostly in relief. Then he held my hand to a canvas handle, which I grabbed and held onto. His touch was gone. I wanted him to do something, put an arm around me, something. Holding on tight to the canvas handle, I wrapped my other arm around myself and cried. Eventually my sobs became shudders. Then, when I'd run out of even those, I just sat there, shivering and wet inside the raft. Something blue flashed for a moment. I blinked and wiped water out of my eyes, trying to see. A smudge of bright, glowing neon blue on the surface of the ocean, rippling and changing shape as the water moved. Phosphorescence. Algae, probably stirred up by the storm. As quickly as the blue appeared, it was gone, leaving me wet and cold and in utter blackness. My shoulders slumped and I hunched back down. I called out, "Is there anything worse than this?" Max didn't answer for a moment. Then finally he said, "Yes." He didn't elaborate, and I was glad because I didn't really want to know what could possibly be worse. Chapter 15. The rest of the night passed slowly, all wind and rain with a constant up and down. I clutched the handle. My gut churned and I leaned over the side and threw up, half expecting the wind to blow my puke right back at me. I was relieved it didn't. My head pounded and my lungs still hurt. After puking the fourth time, I slipped my arms out of my sleeves and tucked them inside my hoodie, laid my head on the wet, cool, soft side of the raft, held onto the handle, and shut my eyes. They opened to a dawn so gray there was hardly a difference in the light, and the rain and wind still pelted us as the raft surged down into large troughs and back up steep crests. But it was slightly quieter than before. I must have fallen asleep or passed out because my neck was stiff from being in the same spot for so long. I sat up. My clothes were sodden and heavy, and I shivered. The Northwest Hawaiian Islands, Midway in particular, were not all tropical. During storms with heavy winds, it could be downright cold. I stripped off my bedraggled socks and dropped them by my side. My fingertips were stiff and wrinkled, and I blew on them and rubbed them together to try to get warm. Slowly, I took in my surroundings. The raft was bright yellow and six-sided. Max's head lolled on the side of the raft, and with knees curled and arms crossed, he seemed to be sleeping. In that position, he looked like a little boy. Some kind of yellow ditty bag was attached to his arm with a bracelet of blue bungee cord. I could see a white t-shirt through his drenched white pilot's shirt. One of his feet had a black sock, one a shiny black shoe. Feeling a surge in my throat, I leaned my top half over the side of the raft and puked into the dark waves. How could there be anything left to come up? Turning my face upward, I let the rain clean me off. A yellow and blue bag labeled Coastal Commander was attached to the inside of the raft, and I opened it up, hoping for some bottled water. Inside were 4 flares. Good, so we would have light if we needed it. A little yellow cup. For drinking? I knew enough to not drink salt water or my own pee. Catching rain, maybe? I held it up and called a few drops, which I used to moisten my mouth, but anything less than a monsoon would take forever to fill the cup. I set it aside. A small square mirror. Signaling, maybe? Only if you knew Morse code. I hoped Max did. As daylight brightened the sky, I held up the mirror and looked at myself. The light blue bags under my eyes startled me a little, as did the glittery diamond in my nose. I'd forgotten about that. I swiped crusty stuff out of my eyes, then smiled wide and fake. Even in the middle of the ocean, my first thought was that I wanted to brush my teeth. Less than a day, and they were already gross. I put the mirror away and moved on to the next item, a flashlight and some extra batteries. I switched on the flashlight. At least we wouldn't be completely in the dark anymore. Just knowing we had a flashlight, the ability to make the dark go away, made me feel a little better. I switched it off. A sponge. No clue what that was for. Seasick tablets. A little late. There was a small first aid kit as well, with some gauze and bandages and a couple packs of Tylenol. My head was killing me, but I figured the Tylenol would come back up as soon as I swallowed them. That was it. No food or water. I zipped the bag back up and threw it at the side of the raft. Apparently, this kit was meant to tide you over while the Coast Guard was on the way, long before you got hungry or thirsty. How stupid to make a survival kit that didn't actually help you survive. I glared at the kit for a moment, then sighed and reached for it once more. Maybe I'd missed something. Max stirred then, moaning and rolling over. A nasty gash ran from the outer edge of one eyebrow up his forehead. I winced. "Are you okay?" I waited a moment. "Max?" He didn't answer. I couldn't stand looking at that wound any longer and reached for the first aid kit. I pulled out a bandage and dabbed gently at his injury, wishing I had something to clean it with. "Thanks for getting me in the raft." I stopped what I was doing. I thought I was going to die. He didn't answer. But I didn't. Drown, I mean. We're in the raft. We're safe. Swallowing the "for now" at the end of the sentence, I continued cleaning his forehead. I stuck on the adhesive bandage, and although it ended up slightly crooked, it seemed secure. Not perfect, but it'll work. I slid down and crossed my arms, leaning back on the side of the raft. My wet clothes were almost unbearable, and my teeth started to chatter. I also had to pee. Bad. Chapter 16. I kept hoping for the sun to come out and warm things up. Warm me up. Otherwise, we'll have to add hypothermia to the list. Why was I talking to Max? He couldn't hear me. So I turned to the left and answered myself. What list? Turning back to the right, I answered. Our list of issues. Like wet clothes? And no food. No water, I added, looking around where there was nothing but water. Well, no fresh water. Hearing the list out loud made it all real and made me worry. I looked at his feet. And one shoe. You only have one shoe. Then I pointed at my bare feet. One shoe is better than none. I sighed. I sighed. Part of me didn't want him to wake up. He'd been so upset about Larry when the plane went down. I didn't know Max at all. I had no idea what he was going to do when he woke up. He was the adult in the situation. Whatever kind of person he turned out to be, I hoped he would have a plan. We drifted for a while, and I didn't say anything else out loud. The joyless gray of the sky blended with the bleak darkness of the water, but I didn't feel as alone as I had in the dark, and there was hope inside me. Hope that we would be found soon. Being cold and tired and hungry wasn't going to erase the big picture. The big obstacle was getting rescued, and I harbored hope that help was on the way. Although I tried to think about other things, good things, things to keep me distracted, it became impossible to ignore my bladder. For the first time, I was glad Max wasn't awake. I did not want to put my legs, or any part of me, back in the sea. On my belly, I slid my bottom half over the edge. My legs were straight out, not in the water, and I managed to get my shorts and undies down far enough so they wouldn't get wet. Well, they were damp from the rain and seawater already, but I didn't want to add pee to the list. Emptying my bladder felt so good, I nearly cried with relief. When I finished, I kind of splashed myself clean, let myself dry a bit in the breeze. I had to smile, thinking of what a view some plane overhead would have had. I pulled my bottoms back up. Later, the rain tapered off and the wind became a light breeze as the clouds finally broke. The sudden burst of warm sunshine spread over my exposed skin. My smile was automatic and genuine. There were a few inches of water in the raft, which I was sick of sitting in. I wondered whether I should bail. Then I remembered the yellow cup and unzipped the Coastal Commander. Was it a bailer? I stuck the cup into the water around me and scooped some up. Seemed like a bailer to me. After working for a while, I managed to reduce the water in the raft by quite a bit, so that the sun could actually dry most of it. The coastal commander had redeemed itself slightly. I wondered if Max would get sick, sitting in wet clothes with the head wound. I knew I couldn't sit in my wet clothes all day. Somehow I needed to dry them, Max's too. Scooting over to him on my butt, I undid his tie, set it aside, and then unbuttoned his white shirt. After that, I had to pause. How strange to be undressing him. Maybe I shouldn't. I mean, he probably wouldn't have done the same to me, although that was different, wasn't it? I shook my head to clear it, tried to take on the mental note of a caregiver. I was just trying to help him, because he might really be injured, and might be worse off if he sat there in wet clothes, and I would feel terrible if I could do something, anything, and didn't. So I grabbed hold of his shirt and pulled it off him. His t-shirt was thicker and wetter and harder to get off, but I pulled it over his head. His chest was tan and muscular, and something silver hung from a black cord around his neck. Max? Max! He didn't answer. I reached out and held it in my hand, then glanced up at his face. I hadn't really noticed before, but he was handsome. Even unshaven and asleep, I shook his shoulder a little. His eyes stayed closed and he didn't budge. The silver at the end of the cord was oblong, with a swirly pattern of different blacks etched into the surface on one side. Something so familiar about it. Holding it in my hand, my glance rested on my thumb, and I realized what the pattern was. A thumbprint in the silver. His own? I pressed the silver thumbprint up against my own. They were very close in size. Max's hands were considerably larger than mine, even though he wasn't that big a man. The print couldn't belong to him. So whose was it? A girlfriend's? I wanted to know more, but he obviously wasn't talking at the moment. I let the thumbprint drop back against his chest. A ragged scar ran down the length of his side. I wondered how he got it, and whether he would tell me when he woke up. He seemed like the type to not want to tell stories about scars, like some people did. He seemed like the type to not want to tell any stories at all. I backed off with the clothes, tossing the t-shirt to a corner of the raft, then holding up the button down so the wind could blow it around, drying the thin material fairly quickly. I put that back on him, which wasn't easy, but I felt a sense of satisfaction when I finished. Then I took off my hoodie and tried the same drying trick, but the material was so thick that even after my arms got tired of holding the thing up, it wasn't near to being dry. I knew I should try to dry my camisole since it was next to my skin. I hesitated for a moment or two. Then, tired of being clammy, I turned my back to Max and pulled my camisole over my head, then held it up in the wind, trying not to think about the fact that I was naked from the waist up in a raft with a man I didn't know. My camisole was cotton and dried pretty quickly. The cloth felt so warm when I put it on, which made my wet Bermuda shorts feel even worse. I realized they would dry just as fast, if not faster, so, glancing at Max to make sure his eyes were still shut, I slipped those off as well. I told myself that having dry pants would be worth the few moments of embarrassment, and my pink underwear actually looked like, and covered more than, my bikini bottoms anyway, so it was all relative. When my pants were dry and I put them back on, I turned around and asked him what had been on my mind for a while. "Do you think they're looking for us?" No answer, as expected. So I replied, "Of course they are." Funny, it didn't make me feel any better. I tried to think of something that would. People have survived for weeks in rafts, in way worse situations than this. One in particular came to mind. Whenever we were down to no new DVDs to watch on Midway, I was forced to watch some older movies. One was about the USS Indianapolis, which in 1945 was on a secret mission to the Mariana Islands to deliver components for the atom bomb that got dropped on Hiroshima a week later. The ship was on the way back to the Philippines when it got torpedoed by a Japanese submarine, and the massive ship went down in 12 minutes. Strange that the G-1 had almost taken longer to sink below the waves than a huge ship like that. The survivors of the shipwreck were stuck out in the ocean with no lifeboats. Some were in life jackets, but some were only in what they had on. Some had jumped in the ocean wearing nothing but underwear. And the mission was so secret that no one knew where they were, so no one knew they were missing. For 4 days and 5 nights, the crew, what was left of it, drifted in the ocean. A plane accidentally spotted the oil slick, and the survivors were finally rescued. There were almost 900 to start, and only a little over 300 survived the time in the water. "See?" I said out loud. "That was way worse." But it was hard for me to think of anything worse than being in a raft in the middle of the ocean with no food or water, not knowing whether anyone would ever find us. Now that I had begun thinking about it, I couldn't stop. Men dying from dehydration, going crazy, sharks attacking. A shudder ran through my body. Living on Midway, I didn't like to think about sharks, but I was still fascinated by them. Most people on the mainland seemed to think great white sharks were the worst, but I'd seen tiger sharks in action. Tiger sharks seemed to be killing machines, reacting only on instinct, which was to kill and eat, not necessarily in that order. They had the nickname garbage can of the sea because they'd eat anything, including people. On Midway, women didn't even go in the water during their periods because the scent of blood might draw sharks. During albatross nesting season, when the young albatross were learning to fly off on their own, the waters around Midway attracted lots of tigers. The young albatross touched down in the water when they got tired. Some of them didn't understand they had to fold in their wings because once their wings got wet, they couldn't fly. So the stupid ones held their wings out as they sat in the water, but they weren't strong enough to keep them up for long. So, of course, they drooped until they touched the water and the feathers got wet. Then the young birds couldn't take off, and they were doomed. The tiger sharks knew exactly when this would happen, and, like clockwork, they showed up every late June, early July for their fill of albatross Happy Meals. I'd been out in a boat with my dad one day when we saw a young albatross floating out in the lagoon. He started to motor toward it when all of a sudden a 2-foot-wide gaping mouth shot up and devoured the bird in one bite, then disappeared below. What scared me the most was that there was no warning, like in the movies, when you get the music and the fin in the water and then the strike. In reality, with the tigers, there was simply a dark shape in the water, a glimpse of that shadow, shiny gray skin, and then instant death. So I had no time for people talking about great whites. Tigers are the true monsters of the sea, and I did not relish having a mere inch or so of inflated rubber between me and them. I shut my eyes and tried to sleep. No such luck.